Eric Richins died with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. And the prosecution said that his wife is the one that poisoned him. But the defense says, not so fast. He had a hidden drug problem. But there's a real issue here. The fentanyl was in his stomach. The pills were never found. The glass was never tested. The state's supply chain witness that was supposedly the dealer, well, that's partially collapsed. So if you watch the opening arguments in this thing, this case looked strong until you remove one pillar. So tonight, we're not going to debate gossip. We're going to ask one operational question. Can a case with powerful toxicology and damaging digital evidence survive without a clean supply chain? So from an investigative perspective, I'm going to look at what survives cross-examination. John is our guy, and he's going to talk about from the 911 intake and custody perspective. He's also got some insight into a key piece of evidence that's been uncovered in this case. Look, jurors don't convict on almost. Prosecutors don't get partial credit. And this case has both strength and risk. It's just like our show. So by the end of this live stream, you're going to understand that the 3 strongest pillars of the state's case are on full display. The 3 weaknesses, though, that can introduce reasonable doubt to the jury because we want a fair trial. And you're also going to understand what actually matters to a jury. Look, Eric Richins was a father. This case isn't entertainment by any stretch of the imagination. It's about whether justice meets evidentiary standards. So what we're going to do, and my partner John's going to join me right now, we're going to start with the strongest pillar, and that's toxicology.
It's my pleasure to be here, Drew. As usual, you start off the show talking about how you're a real cop, authentic cop, and I'm a real-life 911 dispatcher. We're going to go through this evidence. If you're watching this episode at home, you're going to want to stick around to the end because we're going to have a lively debate about who I think is possibly responsible for the death of Eric Richins. But let's start out with those toxicology results, because that's the crux of this case, is how did the lethal dose of fentanyl get into Eric Richins' systems? The prosecutor is saying it got into his body by way of a celebratory Moscow Mule prepared by the defendant. The defense is claiming that Eric lived a rough life of heavy construction work and heavy play, and that he was already dosing himself on some recreational drugs to augment some of the prescriptions that he was getting. And he may not have known what he was taking. And we're going to have to work out how those drugs got into that house. That's a critical part of what the case has, the state has to prove. But let's start out with those results. 5 times lethal dose, Drew.
John and I don't disagree on much, but on this one, I think you're going to find we might have a little bit of
family was so beautiful. Everything was picture perfect.
Linda King used to work with Kouri Richins at Home Depot and remembered Eric, who was a contractor, coming into the store.
You could never forget his laugh. And I love that laugh so much.
So this is the verdict hinge.
Linda says she encouraged Eric to ask Kouri out after she caught his eye.
I says, go over there and check out with her, so they did. And anyway, they ended up having a date. From then on, they were like glued to each other, it was perfect, I thought.
Perfect until March 4th, 2022, when Eric was found dead inside the couple's home. Police originally ruled that there was no foul play in Eric's death from fentanyl. Then a year and 2 months later, things changed.
Oh, so the police had reasonable doubt to start with that she had anything to do with it. But I guess we're going to wait 14 months later, and the police are going to suddenly figure out, after the Richins family spends $100,000 or more in private investigators who are searching to find every single thing they can find to prove their theory about it. Drew, go ahead and let's talk about the
well,
that was in someone's body.
Well, first, let me tell you, you're not wrong. You've got a lot of that correct. I mean, but regardless, if a private investigator or law enforcement uncovers it and it's inculpatory or exculpatory, isn't it kind of worth making sure that the information gets to law enforcement or gets to the prosecutor. And
I guess, but the motive is important. The Soviets used to have a saying, "Show me a man and I'll show you the crime." And of course, there's things in there that are suggestive. But the problem is that now we're talking about the forensic reality of 15 milliliters of fentanyl being inside of his stomach. How did it get there? Well, the delivery system, the murder weapon, if you will, was these glasses containing this Moscow Mule, which is a horrible cocktail, which is a fact, by the way. But those didn't get seized into evidence while the crime scene was still being secured by the police. Those things were sitting in the sink. They had some fluid in them. They were washed out or rinsed out or whatever. But the police obviously didn't even consider the possibility that this could be a poisoning, didn't gather any fluid from that. Crime scene techs did gather other things from the scene. They did process it like it was a crime scene. There was an autopsy done, but they went ahead and released the scene, and the nanny ended up washing out these cups, and they weren't able to find any fentanyl from the cocktail inside those cups. So now the murder weapon is entirely hypothetical, and now we have to make the murder weapon something that's not direct evidence, but something that's circumstantial. We have to make the jury believe. Well, if I'm being made to believe that this is the murder weapon, I guess I have reasonable doubt because I don't have any direct evidence of that. It just could have been that way, and it's going to be a hard sell, Drew.
Right. So we'll get right into
in 2022.
This is the medical examiner. This is the one that did the autopsy. She's obviously got the most medical, she's got firsthand medical knowledge in this whole thing. And she's going to talk about the lethal dose and where she found it.
Were you employed?
Yes, I was a medical examiner at the Utah Office of the Medical Examiner.
Did you perform an autopsy on the body of a person named Kouri Richins on March 5th of 2022?
I did. In cases of potential drug overdose, it is not unusual for opiate overdoses specifically to have pulmonary edema. So you've got foaming of the mouth coming from the lungs. So this was all of the blood testing, and then after I got this testing back and we decided we needed more information, then we also had testing performed on gastric contents. And the purpose of that was to determine if there were any other drugs present in the stomach contents that weren't necessarily showing up in the blood test. And then
so we'll talk a little bit about that because hindsight's always 20/20. You mentioned a minute ago that they didn't secure the scene from the standpoint of taking the offending cups where he may have been poisoned from, but they didn't know to look for them either. So as far as EMS knew, and we'll see here on the 911 call, or we'll see in the body cam at the end of the show, by the way, but that they thought this was a brain aneurysm. I think that she was kind of subtly trying to slip in that there may be some drug use involved, but the medical examiner determined that there was this lethal amount of fentanyl and carfentanil, and she also has the obligation to figure out what was in his stomach, the gastric contents. And that makes a huge difference because the delivery system of, heroin, fentanyl, however, if it's in the THC gummy or whatever, it's going to make a difference in how it was all ingested.
I got you that the police don't know to look for poisoning, and poisoning is unusual, and particularly poisoning with the very common recreational drug that a lot of people are overdosing on. I mean, it became such a national issue that the president made it part of our foreign policy. I get that they're not there looking for that. However, this is a reasonable doubt situation, and we're in a situation where we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that's exactly what she did. Well, that's exactly the crux of the state's case. So I'm not here necessarily to bust the police chops for not detecting this way of, killing somebody. But unfortunately, it does matter. And unfortunately, they're asserting a matter of fact that I don't think that they can prove, Drew.
Yeah, it's no offense taken, but it's just there's a lot of hindsight stuff in this, and you're right. It's a circumstantial case. If they don't have that smoking gun evidence, and we've dealt with that over the past couple of years, it should be noted. Let's not forget the date this occurred, because like fentanyl wasn't. I don't know. Was it as prevalent then as it is now? But
I would say pretty much everything post-COVID became very, very serious.
Yeah.
To the point now where you get in the lobby of a jail, and there's a Narcan, there for people who are getting through bonding out, so they can pick up some to keep on their pocket the next time they're found unconscious. So,
be to give an idea of where the fentanyl might be coming from, because the question would be, was it orally ingested, or was it injected, or, trying to narrow that down a little bit.
One last thing we need to mention about the medical examiner is what was the manner of death? It still remains unknown. We've talked about that on previous cases where, the cause of death, we know that to be fentanyl poisoning, but what's the manner of death? Is it suspicious enough to call it homicide? Well, she doesn't know the manner. We can't. That's exactly the primary problem. And the state medical examiner has said herself, it's undetermined. Well, if the state medical examiner has a reasonable doubt about how it occurred, how can we ask a jury to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt? When the scientist who did the autopsy and knows the detail of the science isn't convinced that it was a homicide, how can a jury be expected to reach that conclusion? Go ahead.
I get it. A case and or a conviction is built like a house, and you've got to put every block in place, and you got to make sure that it's pre-plumbed, and this is one of those cases. We've already addressed the fact that this is circumstantial, but there's a lot of stuff that happened leading up, and then that happened afterwards.
Yeah, and I love circumstantial evidence. I don't want the audience to get me wrong that unless I see it, I don't believe it. I mean, I understand circumstantial evidence very well, but it's one bridge too far to get me to beyond reasonable doubt here. Go ahead.
Right. You believe in ghosts, so
that's true.
So the biological reality was the 15 times amount. She'll explain what the significance of that is.
So that was part of the rationale for doing the gastric testing.
Let's stick to the blood for a minute. First of all, this quantity, you said there was, I think you said 15 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl?
That's correct.
Okay. As a medical examiner, is that, explain what the importance of that number is.
So what you're doing is you're taking the information that you have and you're looking and comparing it to what would be expected in someone who's not taking the drug at all. You expect not to find any. Someone who's taking it as a prescribed medication, so you expect it to be within therapeutic range. And then once you start seeing above that, then you have the potential to go into a level that would be toxic, and if it's high enough, then potentially cause death.
Okay. And in this case, the number 15 nanograms in the blood, given its location.
The fact that I have fentanyl present tells me that fentanyl was obviously ingested at some point recent.
15 nanograms per milliliter, is that a toxic range?
In someone who is not prescribed this medication and taking it routinely, it is toxic.
Does that mean there was 279 milligrams per deciliter of vodka or beer in his stomach when they tested it?
Well, it's not that simple, because you have to take the volume of the gastric contents and then determine a bunch of information. So in essence, yes, Fentanyl was present at 20,000 nanograms per mil, and then norfentanyl was present at 52 nanograms per mil, and acetylfentanyl was present at 29 nanograms per mil.
As a medical examiner, do those numbers mean something in particular to you?
They mean call the toxicologist.
So she's even willing to admit that, you know, like there's only, she has limitations, and she understands what, you know, what somebody is prescribed would kind of, you would normally see, what somebody uses, the level you would normally see, and then obviously the toxic amount. But to get into the weeds about what each of those mean, you would have to call a toxicologist, somebody who specializes in that. And I think the important points that she made, or that the state had her testify to, were, you know, there was no THC in his system, because there are arguments or thoughts that he was hooked on THC gummies, that he used them quite frequently, and all this other stuff. And, you know, you could easily make the argument that you don't know what's in a THC gummy if you're not getting them from a reputable source. It could be loaded with fentanyl. That's, you know, that's every parent's worst nightmare anyway. And then there was like Seroquel in his system, which is prescribed to his wife. So maybe he was taking his wife's medication. Now, the alcohol that they did talk about, because if you know anything about this case, it's said that she made him a Moscow Mule in order to celebrate a closing on a big property that she closed on that he was not really a fan of, but she gave him this Moscow Mule, and then a couple hours later,
obviously takes right before they go to sleep. Makes sense.
Right. Then a couple hours later, he was dead. So when you think about this, though, even the casual user or the new user to like fentanyl or opioids, I don't know that they would have that amount. I think that, like, that fact in and of itself kind of lends to poisoning, versus somebody who just like either took it accidentally or had been taking it, you know, starting their journey into opioid addiction, and all of a sudden they had worked themselves up to this toxic level.
Totally alternate scenario. She's sleeping with the kids because the kids got night terrors. Phone's left behind. Okay. Kouri Richins has some things that she's not proud of that are coming out in this trial. They're all the things that made us hate Scott Peterson and went ahead and convicted him without necessarily giving him a fair trial. The problem is for Kouri Richins is that she's going to be convicted on how she was a faithless wife. That's going to be the main thing. Now, we've all seen people coming into incidental contact with small amounts of fentanyl. What does it do? It knocks them unconscious. They fade right in front of you. You'll see a person standing up, a police officer who doesn't have gloves on, who will touch something that has fentanyl on the surface, and they immediately become unconscious. Okay, well, if we look at the timing of when things went down, it's a little suspicious. We've got a graph here of when phones are being unlocked and being checked. The defense is making the claim that in the middle of the night, Eric maybe unlocked her phone that was left behind in their bedroom and saw all these wonderful gifts and messages from her paramour, this guy that she's going to run off and run away with and have a life with, and she wants him to be her husband and all this. And he sees this and realizes that his marriage is a sham despite everything that they've gone through, that he could lose custody of the kids, that everything could be blown apart. Maybe he's not feeling too good in those moments. Maybe that explains the Seroquel. Maybe that explains the sudden overdose of fentanyl, this guy that can't go on, the guy that can't face it anymore in an emotionally overwhelming moment. Maybe he doesn't even intend to do himself in, but it accidentally happens while she's still in the other room with the kids. I think that's what the defense wants to claim. And I'm going to tell you, it's not an unreasonable thing to believe. In fact, it's so reasonable that it gives me reasonable doubt. It's completely possible that Eric did this to himself in a moment of overwhelming grief about the state of his life and the state of his marriage. And I think that it's going to be difficult to make the claim that that didn't happen. Of course, Drew, how many times have you said it yourself on this show? I'm going to use your own words against you, so lock in. The families never want to believe that their own family member, the decedent, They never want to believe that they had any drug use, that they had any problems, and they never want to believe that they were the person who did themselves in. They never want to believe that. And now Kouri made this book, which apparently rubs their noses in it, especially given the belief that they think that Eric did not do this to himself. And there's all kinds of money out there to reclaim by getting custody of the children and the proceeds from the successful book. And so this is all excellent reason to go out there and sell this narrative that he did not do it to himself. Drew, defend yourself.
I'm not defending anything. We have three pillars that we're going to talk about that support this case, and then three things that kind of crash those pillars. The first, obviously, is that toxicology we just talked about, but toxicology does not convict somebody. It just narrows the universe for sure. So what we're going to do is talk about the digital evidence, because look, if you don't have the whole case here, even if you have it 25, 30% here, and you get 25, 30% here, and you start building off of those circumstances, well, maybe you got something. Now, you mentioned that, like maybe he discovered this and took his own life, or, and I'm sure that those are things that would be introduced to as the proof, is the reasonable doubt part. She was also walking all over her house when she was supposed to be in her child's bed. They can also tell, just like in other cases we've seen recently, through his Apple Health data, what time he stopped breathing, or what time his heart stopped beating, and how long it was before she called 911, or how long it was, when she was in the room and then she called 911 and
called up her family members as well. Something that struck me was that Eric's father arrived on scene, that he was called, and by the time he got there, everyone else was there, so she had plenty of time to make other phone calls.
Yeah. So her claim is that she was sleeping in the child's bed from 9:30 p.m. to about 3 a.m. The digital reality of that whole thing is that her phone was unlocked 6 times during that time period, and there are 370 feet on her phone that have been recorded. And then it was, this time window just narrowed like 15 minutes prior to the 911 call. So we'll talk a little bit more about the movement and such.
It is the evening of March the 3rd, 2022.
By the way, nice of this guy to take a day off from fighting James Bond.
The defendant, Kouri Richins, her husband, Eric Richins, and their 3 children, 9-year-old Carter, 7-year-old Ashton, and 5-year-old Weston, are at their home in Camas. Eric Richins lived for his 3 boys. At 7:22 p.m., Kouri Richins' boyfriend, Robert Josh Grossman, texts Kouri Richins an image of 2 people romantically kissing. The image is captioned, "Love you." At 8:36, Kouri Richins replies, "Love you."
I thought he was going to ask the jury what love was. This guy's an absolute ghoul. He has no stage presence whatsoever. If he loses this case, he will be hired as an undertaker.
The boys go to bed. Kouri Richins makes Eric a drink and takes it to him in their bedroom. He drinks on the bed. She departs the bedroom. Kouri Richins returns to the bedroom at about 3 o'clock a.m. She feels that Eric is cold. She nudges him. He does not respond. She sees that he is stiff and pale. His mouth is wide open. At 3:06 a.m., Kouri Richins unlocks her cell phone. She travels 243 feet beginning at 3:08 a.m. She unlocks her cell phone again at 3:10, 3:15, and twice at 3:19. At 3:21, Kouri Richins unlocks her cell phone and calls 911.
I would like to know what's the appropriate way to respond to when you wake up in the middle of the night and you find your loved one is completely beyond help, passed away.
Well,
We always look at these cases and we always judge the behavior of someone saying it's wrong. How would you respond? You'll never know. The only way that you can answer that question is to put yourself in that situation. And Drew, I hope you're never there. Go ahead.
well, I kind of hope I'm never there too. But there's a lot to unpack. I mean, this is just the opening statement, obviously, but there were 370 feet of movement recorded in the 15 minutes before the 911 call. And that's significant. She's
freaking out because she just found a dead body. She might be running all over the place.
Well, if she's, just like we said in the Linda Sturmer case, which you can find right here, in the Linda Sturmer case, I mean, what would be your delay in calling 911? What would I look, I am the first to tell you, and we've said this a million times. People don't know. You don't know what you're going to do in an emergency like that. I mean, I know what I'm going to do more than likely, hopefully, but I don't know.
Rationally all the time. You have any idea how often a person who's at the scene of an emergency will call a third party because they're upset about something?
Oh, right.
The number of times where a 16-year-old or something will roll their dad's SUV. There'll be injuries. The situation's critical. They call dad first. And all of a sudden I'm getting a phone call from dad saying, hey, my kid just flipped a truck. And I say, where are they? And they say, I don't know. People always behave irrationally. In fact, rationality is the first thing that goes away when you see something as horrible as your loved one dead.
What doesn't happen though normally is 800 deleted text messages, like especially targeted deletion of the
she's in. She knows that she looks guilty. And Drew, this lady, we know this comes up during the trial that she loves true crime. She tells her boyfriend how much I just want to be with you and I wish we were watching Dateline right now or some murder documentary. She knows that she's under any circumstances, she's going to be the first person looked at. And she knows she has all the motive in the world. Of course, she has self-interest that she thinks about at that time. This is gruesome. No one's going to like this take, but he's not getting any worse. He's obviously gone. She can see him. The lividity was complete by the time they got there. They could tell that he was long since gone.
Yeah, he was.
She knows they're going to look at me. They're going to look at these text messages that I sent earlier tonight. And I'm going to be in jail before the sun comes up.
But you should be able to explain them away if you have nothing to do. Like people who have nothing to hide nothing, right?
Well, but that's rational thinking. That's exactly what disappears in a situation.
All right, but the thing that I want to point out to you, and the thing that the state is, building their case on is that it was the specific deletion of a certain contact, her housekeeper, somebody who cleaned her house, Carmen Lauber. And that's not coincidental. It's one text chain and one contact that was completely deleted, not thinking that, they're going to use the technology, the Celebrite to
but why did
extract the data?
Was planned if she knew that she was going to put this in the Moscow Mule, why wasn't that deleted at some other more convenient time?
It may have been. It may have been. I don't know exactly when it was deleted. I can't tell you that. I mean, maybe it's come out in the trial, but just that search history sequence, it's just like it's emotionally powerful to the jury, and like if somebody is poisoned, like what does it go down on the death certificate as? We already
Google Haslung to die from Moscow Mule.
She kind of did
in this case.
She actually Googled it though. There are a bunch of things. It was like if somebody is poisoned, what does it go down on the death certificate as? Can cops force you to take a lie detector test?
Yeah, but how many times did you use ChatGPT this week to help you get through your life? We're all reliant now on Google and ChatGPT trying to figure out things that we don't know, especially in a situation in which we have high anxiety, terrible fears, and no information. If she was planning this out, she might have figured out all those things in advance.
How about luxury prisons for the rich in North America?
Well, she just knows those exist because of the Epstein files.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I think that last one is a little bit more of a wow. then
she could go down for this, and she might want to know what she's facing. When you have nothing to do but sit here and be anxious for 4 years after this happens, every thought in the world's going to cross your mind, and you might want to know what prospects are you facing if you get condemned for something, whether you did it or not. And let's face it, gang, the criminal justice system does not have a sterling record here of doing right by innocent people.
Just like we saw in Karen Reed, John, when the digital evidence contradicts your story, the story becomes the evidence. So you better have everything in line because they did rely on that Haas long to die in the cold forever and ever until it was determined, nope, that was not done until 6 a.m. It's not done at 2:27 like you all think it was. And the defense never challenged that. So while they hung their hat on that, it never happened. It's the same thing in this case. She's actually doing that. She's actually, I think among the other things were like, can they recover your searches? Can the cops recover your text messages? And these are all consciousness of guilt activities. Like they're not just, things.
Consciousness of just getting fucked activities as well,
I suppose.
All right. We're going to talk about 911. So this is always critical. We always talk about this in cases where we doubt whether or not the person really did it or not. We try to go back to the 911 call. We did it in Karen Reed too. We're going to listen to the 911 call and see how it sounds. I'm going to go ahead and play it.
In order to prove that, they have
the address of the emergency. My husband's not breathing. He's cold. Okay, what's the address? 282 Willow Court. 282 Willow Court.
So far, she sounds a little put together, but as I said, we've already noted she did have a little bit of time to think about what was happening. And she knows, kind of like Sarah Boone, that the guy that's laying in the bed, he is a complete portrait of complete death. He doesn't resemble anything close to someone you can save. When someone is completely livid, when they're, Drew, you've seen many deceased people, right. They don't resemble a live person, and it's ghoulish to behold, and you don't even want to look at them. You don't want to go close to them.
Yeah, it's eerie.
For someone you love.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Okay, what's the good phone number in case we get disconnected? 435 61 4987. Okay, it's going to be in Francis. Okay, tell me exactly what happened. I don't know. I just came in. I was sleeping with my kids. Okay, I can't understand you. I need you to take a deep breath.
This also rings true. When it's 911 time, it's also story time, and people will give me deep background. I want to know right away, where is this happening? And this little thing called chief complaint, which in this case would be, my husband's not breathing. But instead, we get a story. A lot of people will say, well, this is her building her alibi. I'm going to tell you, I take 911 calls every day that seem to start a week ago, but it's an emergency now. So this still rings true to me. I guess the question I have for the audience that I'm not going to be as good at parsing this out is, do the emotions ring true? I don't know. I hear so many emotions all the time, and I'm kind of desensitized to them. So I'll have to let the audience make a decision for themselves whether or not it sounds like someone who just got turned into a widow.
What's going on? I don't know. I was sleeping in with my kids. I just came in our bed, and I turned over, and he's just cold. He's just cold. Who's cold?
I would say something that works in her favor is saying, I don't know what the hell is going on. I mean, if suppose, just suspend your disbelief for 1 second that she really did wake up and she really did come into her bedroom and really did find her husband, Eric, completely expired. What would she tell the 911 dispatcher? She wouldn't necessarily have a story at all. She wouldn't necessarily know what happened to him, especially since there's not a gruesome crime scene here. We're not looking at anything disorganized. There's no signs of a fight, no signs of a break-in, no gunshot wound, no stabs, no apparent cause of death to a layperson. I would completely expect them to say, I don't know what happened.
Isn't this where her true crime background kind of catches up with her, though?
We'll see.
And he's not breathing? He's not breathing?
No.
I need you to confirm it for me. Is he not breathing?
This is something that happens a lot. It's frustrating. Establishing the vital sign of the patient, breathing or not breathing. Very important to 911 dispatchers. A lot of times people are not quick to give a definitive answer on that because they have to get real close to see if someone's breathing. We'll have to ask them, hey, can you put your ear next to their mouth? Could you feel anything? Do you see their chest rising? And with this person that's completely beyond help, that's usually how you can tell, is that they don't give you a straight away answer. Yes, or I don't know, is because they don't even want to look at them. You're going to look for other signs of total incompatibility with life, cyanosis in the lips, nail beds. But in this case, this guy is so completely far gone, there's just no mistaking it. And for a drug overdose, something that you might look for if a caller is calling in and they're not as emotionally attached to the patient, usually they're higher functioning. If they're not husbands, wives, family members, you might be able to look in the pupils. If they're fixed and constricted, pinpoint eyes, that's how you can tell that something has happened. But the main thing with a fentanyl overdose is respiratory depression. This is what kills people with fentanyl so quickly, is it immediately depresses their respirations. And if they're breathing fewer than 8 times a minute, that's seriously a problem. Something else we'll ask for is the sound of gurgling, agonal breathing. Are they breathing, but it's not really effective? And if they've got a pulse and some kind of respiration, whether it's effective or not, we're definitely going to push for CPR. If we have any reason to believe at all that it's Narcan, we're going to try to push for that if they have it handy. I know deputies will a lot of times go for Narcan, even in cases where it's a diabetic shock situation. Deputies love pushing Narcan out. So let's listen to the rest of the call.
No. Okay, can you do CPR? No, I don't know how. You don't know, I'm going to tell you how to. Are you willing to do CPR? Yeah. Okay.
All right, so she was willing to do CPR, but obviously in a situation like that, when you're looking at someone, I don't mean to be gross, but I've seen people in really, really terrible states. I've seen people who've been hanged. Okay. And when you're looking at that and you're asking yourself, can I do CPR? And you're talking about what most people think about CPR is you're talking about a mouth-to-mouth situation. It's very, very hard for people to commit to that, even when it's someone they love. And so sometimes asking for CPR, moving someone off of a bed and they're grief-stricken, they're completely in shock, they have no rational thought. It's a bit much to ask. Drew, go ahead.
We had somebody in our comments either, and by the way, I would love it if you left us a comment in the comments section. It really helps us out and it doesn't cost you anything. But if we had somebody in our comments section that thanked us for having this discussion that you just had. We had it in a different show. It was a similar situation where, somebody didn't want to do CPR on their loved one, but they'd been carrying around, the person that commented had been carrying around this guilt forever and ever and ever because they didn't know what to do. They froze and they panicked and felt that they should have done the CPR on their family member, but they couldn't. They in the fight, flight, or freeze, they were in a freeze. And even though the 911 operator was trying to help them, the professional was just trying to get them through it. They were unable to do it, and they've carried around this guilt for years and years and years that they never even tried. But hearing us talk about how it's rather common, actually.
Guilt is actually terribly common for 911 dispatchers who give CPR advice to people and it's ineffective. But we have to remember the statistics. If we're talking about an arrest that wasn't witnessed, like in this case, an unknown amount of time that has transpired, just like in this case, the odds of an untrained rescuer giving somebody CPR through instructions are critically low. I only bring this up to say, if you live with someone that you love, one thing that you can do to show them that you love them is get CPR trained. Drew, go ahead.
Sure. That Eric didn't allow her to do it. Now, I'm telling you right now, wives everywhere sign their husbands' names on a lot of things. You've got to find that she did it without his knowledge, and I don't know how they're going to prove that.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the financial stuff at the end of this, but essentially what happened was they're trying to sell the fact, the state's kind of making the case that there's extra insurance that was taken out right before the death, and what the defense is saying is that it was just one of these mailer things from your credit union or whatever, and that she signed his name for $100,000. She even minimizes the $100,000,
saying it was just an amount of money that he makes in a couple months.
Yeah, if this defense attorney looks familiar in any way, shape, or form, this is the same defense attorney that's representing the guy that shot Charlie Kirk.
Now, there is one piece of good news as you evaluate this evidence and the facts in this case. There is some good news for you. There are going to be a lot of facts that we actually agree on that we're not even going to challenge. We'll just be like, yeah, that happened. Hopefully that's going to help the case move a little faster for you guys. But interestingly, even though we're not going to dispute the facts, we sure are going to dispute what the facts mean. Sometimes you can look at the same facts and see two very different results. Let me show you what I mean. Katie, can you put up slide 12? So look at this picture of a young woman in a fur coat. See it? Now look again. You see a witch?
This image always gets me. I never see the witch. Where's it at?
The witch, you can't see my mouse, but do you see the young woman's hair?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's the witch's overgrown bangs, and just below that is her nose, and then just below that is her chin.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, she looks, I would say not necessarily a witch, but I would say like more like she's got that refugee look. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
right.
I get what she's saying, that you could say take the same picture and you can interpret it in many different ways. I think she completely nailed this case. By the way, when I was watching the opening statements, and I always cringe when they have audio video problems. I think that every court needs to have a high-ranking audio video official.
Look, I think though that it's almost intentional. Like this judge, I think first of all, he's got a set of pipes on him. Like if you ever heard if you've heard the judge in this case, he has this amazing FM radio voice.
I'm looking forward to another great judge. It'd be great.
He also maintains control of his courtroom. He does very well. He's very polite and, just seems like a nice guy, but he controls the visual aids in the sense that before the jury sees it, he wants to make sure that it's good for the jury to see. You know what I mean? Like we don't want any oopses. Like there was an oops or two in the Karen Reed trial when they just threw stuff up there that they didn't want and there's nothing that's going to get to a mistrial faster than the jury seeing something they're not supposed to see.
We call that unduly prejudicial. Jury form a belief based off of something that's shocking or emotional, or something that's not even relevant to the case because we accidentally slip it in there.
Yeah, and it's not even, like maybe they've even agreed upon it in discovery, but then in the course of the trial, like have determined, okay, well, that's going to be prejudicial. So we don't want to, we definitely don't want to show that. And then they end up showing it because sometimes the AV people don't get the word either. So,
but it's why you don't see defendants wearing jail clothes or restraints. It's unduly prejudicial.
Nose, mouth. There's going to be times in this case where the state is going to discuss facts with certain witnesses, and they're going to show you the witch. And I'm going to take those same facts and those same witnesses, and I'm going to show you a widow.
So widow or witch, that's where we're at, John.
At the end of the trial, if you can still see both faces, that's reasonable doubt.
The walk the dog letter is a prominent part of this case because there was a piece of mail. She wasn't in her cell.
Well, let's not neglect how the reason why she wasn't there. She was in the state's care, and they fed her the wrong medication that gave her a seizure, which is somewhat ironic that she had medical problems too that were complicated by taking the wrong thing. But she was not in her cell for a while. And when you're a correctional officer, something that you do on a daily basis is random and dedicated cell searches. You're going to go through, look for contraband. You're going to look for the dummies, the things that you get Ferris Buellered by so that people escape Alcatraz with. That literally happened in 1962. Or just, any kind of excess of property or anything that somebody's not allowed to have, a shiv, things like that. But, even extra peanut butter sandwiches are going to be expiring in there. Anything that's unsanitary, you're going to go through. Well, the thing is that in a jail, especially before people are adjudicated, but sometimes even thereafter, they have property in their cell that's not okay for correctional officers to take a peek at. That's called legal mail or legal materials. It's stuff that's covered by privilege between a client and their attorney. And sometimes there can be evidence in there that can be incriminating, and it's not at all usual. It's not at all a usual way for the state to gather evidence is through correctional officers doing cell searches. However, this case proves that it can happen. Now, this letter that says "walk the dog" was a letter addressed to her mother or her brother or family members that sort of gave them instructions on how they should be testifying in this case. Of course, they call it the "walk the dog" letter because in the header of the notebook paper, it was an instruction to walk the dog, but it also said leave vague notes for yourself. Which
we're going to get in depth into what the note says. So
it's a little bit Epsteinish there, the way he leaves vague notes for himself to remember things, and it's almost. I was wondering if maybe she was encouraging them to do the same. But go ahead, Drew.
It just should be noted. So what John's talking about is that there's no expectation of privacy in a jail cell, but like he just described, the legal mail, and their argument
That'll
is
be in a package that says legal mail on it. By the way, it's never confusing when you see that.
Yeah, their argument is that this was attorney-client mail, but then it later came out that this letter that we're talking about here, that we're going to describe to you in detail in a second, was stuck in between the pages of an LSAT book, and she had spent some time in law school, I think, or but at any rate, she was studying law and she had an LSAT book and she stuck this letter in it. And once it was discovered, the argument became, well, it was an attorney-client stuff. They should have never seen it. Then the argument shifted to, and this is where the judge kind of said, okay, well, I'm going to allow it. It shifted to like, no, I was writing a novel. All that, everything you see in that letter is fiction. I was writing a novel. Now, this is relevant because she did write a book. She wrote a book about, for her children, about the death of the father, and, just kind of like, hey, I'm with you. I'm always with you. It's, some catchy title like that. And she had taken it on kind of like a little local media book tour and all that. So she used the "I'm an author" excuse to say, no. Everything in there is not incriminating. It was just part of a novel I was writing, kind of like the Mark Furman, defense.
Well, she had to do that because she knew that it was essentially stashed away. It was essentially hidden in a place that a correctional officer looks for contraband. You always shake out a book. That's something that you would always do as a correctional officer. And this thing was found in there, and it has some very, very troubling things in it. If she can reframe it as not relevant, well, this is all just documents for my next bestseller, all of a sudden, there's no reason to have it in a trial because it's just fictional material. So she had to try to reframe it as something irrelevant to the trial.
All right, we're going to get to
She
it.
wants to link Eric getting the drugs and pills from Mexico, so we need some kind of connection. Her private investigator is doing some research on the ranch cartel place Eric would stay at. Here's what I'm thinking, but you have to talk to Ronnie. He would probably have to testify to this, but it's super short, not a lot to it. He will need to talk to Skye at the meeting next week. Upon information and belief, just like they say, a year prior to Eric's death, Ronnie was over watching football one Sunday, and Eric and Ronnie were chatting about Eric's Mexico trips. Eric told Ronnie he gets pain pills and fentanyl from Mexico from the workers on the ranch, but not to tell me because I would get mad because I always said he just gets high every night and won't help take care of kids. Ronnie should have texts from Eric talking about getting high as well. Eric told Ronnie he keeps them in an allergy pill bottle in his work truck so I wouldn't find them. Ronnie never told me about the conversation. Eric finally told me and asked if Carmen could get him some. Eric never wanted anyone to know he had an issue, especially get caught. He always wanted Kouri to go down for him. Reword this however he needs to make the point just to include it all. The connection has to be made with Mexico and the drugs. Ronnie will have the messages to prove Eric confided in him about getting high. He can be short and to the point, but it has to be done. When you talk to Ronnie about this, meet up with him in person. I worry sometimes your house and phone are bugged. Tell him I need him to do this. Bring me home, and then we will get those damn bitches. We're so close to the end. Let's push through. Have the conversation with Ronnie before he meets with Sky. Then tell him to tell Sky at the meeting about the conversation. Hang in there. We're almost there. Love you to the moon.
Doesn't sound very hypothetical, I have to be honest with you, especially since one of the characters' name is the same name as her husband, and she is also mentioned in it. But
And her brother.
But I'm going to just throw this out there because I know that this evidence does look bad. The thing is that she's in a terrible situation. She knows that she might be going to a future luxury prison somewhere in Utah. She knows that it's not just on her to just shake her head and say no when all the evidence is presented by the state. She knows that, like Karen Reed, there has to be an alternate story. The defense has to come up with a tale of their own to talk about. And that doesn't have to be true. Of course, as we talked about in the Karen Reed case, the alternate theory about what happened to the police officer who was hit by a car there or not, the alternate theory in there was not subject to any kind of real scrutiny. It wasn't subject to the laws of perjury. It just became this alternate scenario that it became a huge conspiracy theory that everyone believed. So she knows that it's not just going to be the case that she says to whatever's presented against her, even though according to the law she doesn't have to even present any evidence of her innocence at all. But she needs a tale. She needs an alternate theory to explain what's going on, particularly when the provenance of the drugs is completely unknown. Wouldn't it be nice if we did have a story to tell the jury about how he came by those? And maybe it's not, maybe the story itself of how that came by is fictional, but maybe the details, like the many of those stories gleaned from Laura Ingalls Wilder, are heavily based on a true story. Drew?
It also smacks of Donald Adelson. Let's continue on. We're almost at the
show the search of her cell where this is found. And it is a little confusing as to where it was found. The state says that it was found in an LSAT book where Kouri and the defense are sort of trying to claim that, no, this was found in a manila envelope titled attorney-client privilege. And there's certainly some division among what this is, why it was written, and where it was found. And that holds a lot of weight, I think, when it comes to whether or not this can be used as evidence in the trial.
So we've given you 3 reasons why this is strong. We've counterpointed most of it. Let's pivot a little bit, because if the state of this is this strong, why would the defense be smiling their way through why would they be using like 1970s mimeographs in their as graphics in their opening argument? So there are some huge issues they're going to have to overcome, one of which is the supply chain, which we'll hear about right now.
Did Kouri Richins ever ask you to purchase for her illicit drugs?
Yes.
How many times?
4.
Did you purchase illicit drugs for her?
Yes.
How many times?
4.
When you purchased illicit drugs for Kouri Richins the first time, who did you purchase the drugs from?
Susan Kohler.
When you purchased Kouri Richins drugs the second time, who did you purchase the drugs from?
Robbie.
By Robbie, do you mean Robert Crozier?
Yes.
How about the third time?
Robbie.
The fourth time?
Robbie.
So here's the issue. She is the housekeeper. She's the contact that's been deleted, and all of her texts have been deleted out of Kouri Richins' phones. She's testifying. However, she is facing charges herself. She's a cooperating witness, essentially.
The court has appointed her an attorney as well. Yeah.
Right. So she's saying that she bought pills because Kouri Richins asked her. Kouri said, I've got a client that has back pain, and she didn't tell her anything more than that. She's like, can you get some stuff for me? And she agreed to do it. So she got she was buying from the second guy that she mentioned, this Crozier, however you say it. And he said, yes, I sold her fentanyl. And the fentanyl went back, through the intermediary, which is the housekeeper, Lauber. That's who you were seeing testify there, to Kouri Richins. She described where the money was that she used to pay for it. She described the envelope that the pills came in and everything. So you've got this, you've built this case of saying, okay, now we have witnesses saying that the defendant bought fentanyl. And it makes it a very interesting, even more interesting case now that you've built that. The problem is the source recanted. The first guy, the main dealer said, yeah, I sold them OxyContin. I didn't sell them fentanyl. So that's an issue, because you're not going to have that level of fentanyl, or it's not carfentanil, but there's another derivative in there. And you're not going to have that in OxyContin. So he's saying, so he avoids lying, basically, that, yeah, I sold them drugs, but it's not the drugs you think. Because I don't know if it's a matter of like, he can't be insulated from the death itself, or, you know what I mean? Like,
let's look at the long-term implications. If he admits that he supplied the drugs that killed Eric, okay, so, we're talking about maybe getting him some sort of deal for limited immunity for testifying to that. But this case is really all about the civil implications down the road. He can be sued for wrongful death for supplying those drugs. The person that gave the drugs that killed John Belushi got sued, and in addition to going to jail. So if he admits that he supplied the drugs that killed Eric, it's more than just what's right in front of him. He's got long-term consequences to look at, and he has every reason to look at for his own self-interest. And that's the same thing with the housekeeper, with Lauber too. She's got self-interest to pursue, and I'm sure that when she was sitting down with police officers who are trying to figure out the provenance of the so-called murder weapon, they might have been leaning on her a little bit about what her prospects for the future were as well.
Right.
Was the kitchen also searched?
Yes, it was.
So pillar two of the other side of this case, one being, you don't need you definitely don't need a drug dealer to convict, but losing the dealer is definitely going to make your job a little bit harder. The second pillar to this is actual evidence that was not recovered.
And were there items that were located in the kitchen that you documented?
Yes.
It's kind of cool that they Matterport the crime scene. I'm sure a lot of agencies do it.
And I've been asking you about items of significance. The items you're looking for, those are items that were in the search warrant, correct?
Correct.
Meaning that the search warrant told you what you were supposed to look for.
Yes.
All right. If we could go forward just a small, there we go. All right, we could pause it there. Okay, so we're, what area of the home are we looking at now?
We're in the kitchen now.
And we mentioned that there were items found in here. If you could grab item 9-13, please.
So essentially what happened is, I don't think it was this forensic detective or crime scene tech that found it, but there were 2 Moscow Mule cups in the sink with liquid still in them, which would have been perfect had they known, and for those of you who don't know what Matterport is, I think it originated in the real estate or engineering industry, and it's a way to 3D photograph a place. So people could do like a virtual tour, and they use these in crime scenes now. You can, judge distances, and you can mark evidence and such. So the problem here is the weakness too. We're missing the murder weapon. The murder weapon was, as they allege, because the contents of the stomach showed the fentanyl. They say that there was a celebratory drink, which she admits to, like a nightcap, Moscow Mule, which is John's favorite drink. It's vodka and ginger beer.
Gross.
And in a certain kind of mug, like a copper little mug. So those Moscow Mule glasses would stand out. Like they're the most tangible piece of evidence in the case. They were like observed in the sink by first responders. There was even liquid in it. But the nanny the next day, just like being the nanny, just kind of dumped everything out, put them in the dishwasher and sanitized them.
To me, though, this is also indicative, right? Okay, so you got the Moscow Mules that have got poison in it. Well, they're pitched in the sink. They got water running them, but they're not dumped out. They're not washed the night of. It would have been easy to start up a load before everyone goes to bed instead of leaving them out with evidence in them. But also, if we wanted to stage this as an overdose, couldn't we have gone to the hilt? Couldn't Kouri have left him in the bed and left all kinds of paraphernalia or whatever else from his gummy usage or however, purported the fentanyl to get into his system? Could have left pills all over his chest. Could have left it a scene, something that would resemble what police would recognize as an obvious overdose. Instead, the situation where Eric was found was confounding. They thought it was an aneurysm. There was no overt sign of an overdose. If this is what she wanted it to be, if she wanted to have this go down as the official story of what happened to Eric, how come she didn't try harder to sell it? That's just something to think about, Drew.
Well, but on the other side of that, why would those cups end up in the sink? If he just had a drink for a nightcap and passed out, went to sleep or whatever, she was asleep in another bedroom, she shows up at 3 a.m. How did the drink cup get from there to the sink? Like,
I think that's a matter of just personal fastidiousness. I'm always putting the cups in the sink right away. I don't know.
I know, but my point is, under her theory or under her story, it's like, yeah, he had this drink and then he went to sleep, but I cleaned up and I put these cups in the sink. Like, what?
Telling you that I don't think the fentanyl was in the Moscow Mules to begin with. I think he woke up in the middle of the night and he had a sudden reason to wanted to kill some pain. So my theory is completely different than the Moscow Mules altogether.
Yeah, there's also there's also history of that he believed that she tried to poison him before by serving him a sandwich. And I guess,
yes, the sandwich assassination attempt that he was laughing about, that when he said that she was trying to poison him was a joke.
So think about,
let's take that seriously.
in a poisoning case, the delivery mechanism is obviously the whole case. Like, you can prove that he was killed by fentanyl, but you definitely have to prove how the fentanyl got there. So this is an issue. This is a big issue in this case. So this is issue 2 of 3. Here comes the third, though, and it's a lot of circumstantial
to this day,
stuff.
The medical examiner, the professional that's the head of declaring how people die in the state of Utah, has never been able to determine the manner of Eric Richins' death. Now, you're going to hear first responders and law enforcement tell you that no fentanyl was found in the bedroom the night of his death. But you're also going to hear them that they didn't search for it. We've all seen the TV shows, the crime shows. What do you do if there's a murder, right? If you think there's a murder, tape it off.
Look, there's no reason to bring that up other than to plant the seed into the jury that this is CSI, that you need to mimic what TV does. We've all seen the TV shows.
Well,
you need to put the tape up.
It's also reasonable, when you're going to talk about the police not doing what the police know they should do, which is going to be an element of this case. We have police officers who are taking pictures before the scene's secured. They're not putting placards in place. It's more about establishing a narrative that the police aren't doing the job to the best of their own ability or to the best of their own knowledge, that the common person from watching a show like CSI might be better informed in how to control the scene. I'm not saying that I'm not asserting that as a matter of fact, but I think it's a qualified strategy for discrediting some of these police officers, because there were lapses in the investigation, because there are lapses in every investigation, and it's her responsibility as a defense attorney to leverage that as much as possible.
No one gets in or out. It becomes a crime scene. You search everything. You search the closet, you search the bathroom, you search the vehicles, you search the house, you search the office. They didn't do that.
You got to know what you're searching for.
All kinds of friends and family, and you're going to see video of all the people that were in the house that day. There was no restrictions on anybody. And guess what was sitting in the sink? The cups. They were sitting there. They were never taken. They were never tested. Nothing. The nanny ended up putting them in the dishwasher the next morning, and they still had fluid in them.
So the motive may exist, but the jury is only going to hear part of it. Like the rest of it is financial. Like here's the timeline of the whole thing. She closed on this incredibly expensive piece of property that she'd been chasing. He ran a stonemasonry business. She was a house flipper, and she wanted this multi-million-dollar property. They stood to make upwards of, or they stood to make like $12 million on this property. They were going to, I think the closing price was like, cost was like 2 point something million. And he wasn't in favor of it because it was going to be a headache, a nightmare. And she was just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And she really wanted to do it. So she ended up doing it. However she did it. And that was the celebratory drink, the Moscow Mule. Like, hey, I closed on this. We're going to be rich as soon as we get through this property thing. Then there was a lot of stuff that happened after. I mean, like there are some life insurance policies. I mean, they were like sinking fast in debt, 4.5 million. And, she stood to gain like 3.9 million. He was definitely worth more alive. I'm sorry. He was definitely worth more dead than alive. Yeah.
Money did go into a trust being managed by his sister, though.
Which she did not know.
Which she didn't necessarily know about. But the amount of money that they were sinking into, that's the reason for the celebration. They were going to be getting out of this. They knew that if they could make $12 million, they were going to completely reverse their fortunes. And the prosecution is making this out to seem like, oh, they're this many millions of dollars in debt. To a chump like you and me, that seems like a lot of money. But when you're constantly flipping houses, you're constantly acquiring debt. You're almost, within the time frame of flipping it. That's why it's called flipping, because it's fast. You're eliminating that for profit. People do this all the time where they take on massive amounts of debt, and it seems like amount of debt that they're not going to be able to manage, but they're not actually going to be making mortgage and property tax payments on this and home insurance payments on this. They're going to be transforming it quickly. And the place that this house is in, this mansion is in a beautiful place. It's a place where, Kouri, I guess to her detriment, she even talked about just managing it as an event center with her boyfriend someday when she finally got the life that she wanted. But that was the advantage of taking this on, is that all this debt that is supposedly the motive was not actually going to be a problem. And if we're going to talk about money as a motive, again, I take you back to Eric Richins' family, where they want to be able to control the money. We could talk about how money goes into a trust or it goes into an estate. The truth is that even with a will or with a trust, if you're the wife, you still have enough leverage to take this to court, and you can argue in probate court that these things that are part of a will or part of a trust should be negated or otherwise managed. You still have that leverage as somebody who's a wife. So when you say that the money is completely set up as this motive, I don't think it's as straightforward as that. But she also, as I said, wrote this book that depicts Eric's likeness. She got someone to illustrate the book, so it depicts his likeness. His name's mentioned in the book. It's dedicated to him. There are laws in the state of Utah saying that you can't benefit from published works about a person. It's called the Slayer Law, that you can't make any money off of, and you can't profit off of anything that you sell that's related to a crime in which you're the perpetrator of someone that you killed. And so they know that not only are they going to get all the money that's set aside for the children, all the money and all the estate that Eric had going for him as a successful contractor and everything else, they know that they can get all of that. They can get custody of the kids, and they can get the proceeds and benefits of everything that she's earned from these book sales. And that's another reason why they're motivated by money as well.
So it's just a deadly intersection. She bought a property she wasn't supposed to buy. It's not a good look. It happened on the day that he died, which, again, we talk about the circumstances, but these are The big thing about this is that the judge in the case ruled that they were, because there was a series of financial related crimes that she was charged with on top of the homicide, and it was ruled that you're going to have to separate those. You can't try, we're not going to have you try the murder and all the financial stuff, because that goes right to motive. You're going to have to separate those, and we're going to try the murder first, prove it however you're going to prove it, and then you could try your financial crime. So she's, even if she's acquitted on the murder, she's not out of the woods. But March 4th, 2022 was this guy's last day on earth, and he had a $4 million estate. The mansion flip would have made a lot of money for both of them if they had gone through it, but I don't know, John. I think
there's also the money that he would have made staying alive. It's not just, I get that she's got this alternate life that she wants to live, and wouldn't it be easier if Eric was out of the way, and wouldn't it be easier if she just had access to the money? But it's a compelling narrative, but lots of people feel this way. Lots of people are in unhappy marriages, and lots of people want to capitalize and not lose everything while still moving on. It doesn't mean that they necessarily do these things. She might have all the motive in the world, but it doesn't mean that she did it. Go ahead.
We ran a little over tonight. We're going to do, I'll do a little side project with the release of the body cam information. You can see here. It's compelling in the sense that from an interviews and interrogation standpoint, but just understand that this case is not going to be decided on emotion. It's going to be decided by which absence matters more. We gave you 3 pillars for them, 3 pillars that knocked the first 3 pillars down. You tell us what you think right in those comments section. Is she going to walk on this? Did she even do it? Because John seems to think that she is living at the foot of the cross. I, on the other hand, think they built a pretty good circumstantial case. But, when you're going to send somebody to prison for the rest of their life, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We all know that. Will they be able to prove that? John, do you have any last words?
No, sorry if we went over time here. This body cam footage is very compelling, just like the 911 call. You're going to want to stick with this channel as we watch this trial unfold. It's going to be in the coming weeks. We're going to be having lots of material coming up. Remember, this is the place for operational true crime. Other people kind of talk about it. They sip their coffee and they wear their Ugg boots, but they don't know. Drew's a real cop. I'm a real 911 dispatcher. And I actually used to work at a prison too, so I know a little bit about how that legal mail might be gathered into evidence. But we appreciate you. Make sure you hit like and subscribe to keep up with more content just like this. Drew?
We have a similar case that we want you to watch, and it's like right here. I want you to go watch that.
Great case. 10,000 episodes.
10,000 hours worth of 10,000 episodes. That's 100,000.